for the introduction. What I want to do, I want to tell you why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's quite anecdotal how I came into doing this work. I'll begin with telling you why I'm doing that, and hopefully I'll end with telling you what do Israeli and Palestinian women think about their right to peace, and a lot of stuff in between. In 1995, 1993, right after the Oslo Accord, I was invited to present a paper at Columbia's teacher college in a conference called Women and Change in the Middle East. The invitation came quite late, and first I was going to decline the invitation, but just like 6 weeks before that, the Oslo Accord was signed, and things in the Middle East, at least then, seemed very promising, and I accepted the invitation on condition that I will present a paper that I had already had. I was just completing a book on the Arab-Israeli peace process, and I wrote a chapter on the Oslo Accord, and the condition was I'll use that and not have to write a paper, a new paper, in the 2 weeks that I had for preparation. So it was okay. It was accepted. I was sitting in a conference for 2 full days. My panel was on the second day. It was the last panel in the conference. And throughout those 2 full days, a lot of women were talking on the Middle East. A lot of Arab women were talking on the Middle East. A lot of Palestinians were talking on the Middle East. A lot of talk on the suffering of Palestinian women under the condition of conflict and under a quarter-century of occupation. Their words talk on suffering, and the demands for freedom and dignity fell on sensitive ears, including my own, of course. But I was very much surprised that in 2 full days there was not mentioning at all, not even one word, on the suffering of Israeli women under the condition of prolonged conflict. So when my turn to speak came, I spontaneously shoved my paper on Oslo aside, and I decided to share with the audience my own experience some 25 or so years earlier as a very, very young war widow in Israel. And I said spontaneously because had I thought about it, I probably wouldn't have done that, because I exposed my privacy in front of a huge audience. So what I told the audience, I told the story of widowhood, and it was very graphic, describing what did it feel like to see your husband burned beyond recognition and hearing him breathing his last breath, choking to death. I was telling the conference, what does it feel like losing an unborn child in wartime? I was telling the conference, what did it feel like as a woman, blaming myself, as a very young woman, blaming myself for the loss of the child, depriving my in-laws of their future grandchild, the only legacy left of their son. I was sharing with the conference what did it feel like as a young woman who just lost a baby, a child, to be forced by 2 male interns in a hospital, to be forced into an operating room against my will when I'm protesting, and to start performing a DNC when I'm not properly anesthetized. I was sharing with the conference what did it feel a year later when the government decided to stop compensation for childless war widows, because I learned later it was a policy geared to rehabilitate young women under severe economic condition. Rehabilitating mean get married. I was sharing with the conference what did it mean to run by myself a campaign against the government, because no other woman wanted to join me in my campaign against the government. What did it feel like not being able to share, and as a very young woman not demanding at the time any input or influence in the decision-making process of the government when these decisions affected my life and the life of other women so directly. At a certain point it became much too difficult to talk about those things. So I took a deep breath and I got back to my Oslo paper and presented it. Nobody cared about the Oslo paper. And while doing my talk, I saw the audience before when I was talking about my personal experience. They were honestly moved. I heard the sighs and I saw the facial expressions. And as I said before, I was very graphic. I was obviously in pain as I was talking, and I was very, very real. So at the end of the conference, there were two papers after me. But when I started talking about Oslo, that was already the conference became anti-climatic. At the end of the conference, I was surrounded by many, many women in the room, mostly Arab, many Palestinians, who wanted to know a lot about me, about my experience. And the picture that came across was that they didn't know. They did not know that Israeli women suffered too. For them, the Israeli women were the occupiers, the strong. I remember some women touched me, and one of them particularly, she was an Iraqi psychologist, told me, your skin is so soft. And I looked at her and I said, what did you think my skin is going to feel? So she was smiling, she didn't know what to say. The atmosphere was, that moment was the moment where it made no difference who was Israeli and who was Arab and who was Palestinian. We were all product of the same political environment in the Middle East. I've been living in the United States for about 25 years at a time. So I was not an Israeli who just came from the Middle East, but nonetheless I represented a picture of Israeli women that suffered by war. I decided at that very moment, when it all happened, that I had to encapsulate this minute. How do I do that? So I decided to write about that experience and to relay the stories of Israeli women bereaved and aggrieved by war to Palestinians and to other men and women in the world who really don't know that side of the Israelis. But I also decided at the same time to tell stories of Palestinian women. I started to inquire about it. I got a grant and I went to Israel to interview women. As I was doing my work later on, as a matter of fact, not too long ago, I discovered that the idea of sharing personal experiences of victimization has been a tool for reconciliation. That was my idea, to use the personal anecdote as a tool for reconciliation. That idea has been used in conflict resolution, especially in the 1990s, probably because of the spread of ethnic conflict as a result or after the end of the Cold War. And the particular method is called forgiveness. And what forgiveness seeks is to humanize the enemy. And by humanizing the enemy, supposedly the need for hatred, emotional hatred, and the need to avenge past injustices is disappearing, and instead you have a condition both of the yearning to talk to one another and to move for reconciliation and negotiations. By the way, forgiveness is borrowed from the fields of philosophy and religion, but it does not need a religious context for its application. So I was going to do that by sharing stories, but that was not enough for me. I wanted to go beyond the personal stories. I wanted to know, for example, do bereaved Israeli women view themselves as victims, like Palestinian women do? Do they believe that they have a special role to play as peacemakers? Do they believe they can be peacemakers? Do they resent the new social conditions? Do they blame the government for the new, or the leader, in the case of the Palestinian leadership? Do they blame the leaders for the new social conditions? Do they look at peace as a right, as an inherent right to live in peace, and that involve many other things, to live in conditions that are not absence of poverty, resulting from the death of the breadwinner in the family, etc., etc. Of course, it's obvious that Palestinian and Israeli women all want to live in peace and all look at their right to live in peace as inherent. Since independence, Israelis demand the right to live within secure and recognized borders, and Palestinian women and men demand the right to live as sovereign people within recognized and secure borders, personally and as a nation, because they do not have personal security under. They did not have personal security under occupation. And if you read today's New York Times, there's all issue of the violation of human rights, even under the Palestinian authority. And again, since mutual blame is so easy, what I wanted to find out is, who do women blame? Do they blame anybody? Why focus on bereaved women and aggrieved women? Why, aside from the conference that gave me that opportunity to do that, I felt that the group of bereaved and aggrieved women is composed of individuals who paid the heaviest price for the leaders' military, security, political decisions, yet they were least influential in the process of decision-making in these fields. How would women then express the demand for peace as a human right? How would they express their opposition to war? Well, most times they would express that through formation of peace groups. And looking at women and the whole issue of women and peace, what most of the literature is saying about that is that most of the literature actually associates peace movement with the nurturing nature of women, dissociating women from bloodshed and war. But that linkage completely neglects the historical fact that women for centuries have led their armies, have led armies to war, have supported their militaries, and have supported the army, the state in war. So what explains women peace movement? What explains Argentinian grandmothers and grandmothers who still, I understand, are still meeting every Thursday with the pictures of those who disappeared in the 1970s and 80s? What explains in the 1980s women in Europe who were demonstrating in opposition to nuclear armament? What explains groups like Women in Black in Israel that emerged in the Intifada, or Mothers Against Silence that emerged in Israel during the 1982 war? Women in Green in Israel who opposed to territorial concession. And now they are running a campaign in many papers, I see ads, running a campaign claiming that the Israeli media conspire against them and is not reporting any of their demonstrations. More recently, for mothers in Israel, demanding the unilateral withdrawal of Israeli forces in Lebanon, and most recent, two Israeli bereaved mothers who met with the previous government, staged for a whole month a hunger strike in front of the Prime Minister's office, demanding unilateral withdrawal from Lebanon. What explained a few months ago in Kosovo, the mothers and wives of soldiers who demanded that their husbands and sons would be released from reserve duty. We read about it in paper. And rather than explaining those groups in terms of the nurturing nature of women, I think that women do that because they demand the end to war as a social condition that they deserve. They demand most of all accountability. Accountability from those who made the decision either to go to war, or accountability from those who made the decision not to negotiate peace or to continue the conflict, the situation of conflict anymore. Incidentally, having said that, I must say that in Israel, although no statistics exist of how many bereaved women participate in those peace groups, those who know and those who do participate told me that hardly any bereaved woman participate in those peace movements. In the Palestinian society, that I'll talk about in a minute, the situation is a little bit different. Who do I interview in Israel and who do I interview in territories? I interviewed 30 women in Israel. Now, I must admit before I continue that this is not a scientific study. 30 women certainly is not enough for a scientific study. Of the 30 women that, of the women that I approached, first of all, those women is a particular group, a very narrow group. Second, of that group, I didn't reach all of the group. Third, of those who I reached, many changed their mind, they didn't talk to me. So only, first of all, the reason I interviewed only 30 was that after 30 women, I could no longer do that. It was so hard and so difficult and so heartbreaking and so concentrated that after my last, the 30th was my last, and I for my own well-being, emotional well-being, I was unable to do that, to continue that. Who did I interview? So of the 30 women, and of course, there are not the other reasons this study is not just scientific. Although I tried to group them and find women from each bereaved or grieved because of each, as a result of each particular war, I didn't divide them into age group. I didn't divide them into level of education and all the other things that would make this study scientific. Nonetheless, I believe that the women I did talk to represent a part of a society in Israel that have, and the Palestinian Authority, and the Palestinians, that have something to say, that have important story to tell, and have the potential to be heard and to make a difference, if they only believe that they could do that. Perhaps I'll leave, of the 30 women, that it's too long, so maybe I'll leave it for the Q&A period, but there were bereaved women from all the wars. There were widows. There was one woman, a 40-year-old, severely handicapped, that was caught in an attack on the Syrian border, who complained to me and asked me that was particularly, they were all difficult, but a 40-year-old woman whose life, she's existing with the help of nurses and therapists, and she asked me, do you know what I did when I was caught under an attack? I was making a salad for everybody else. In other words, what she meant, I didn't have any function of security. There was no important decision that I made. I made a salad. The traditionally made function. I was washing the floor, something like that. Who did I? One woman was, her son has been missing in action since 1982, and she believes that he is alive. And one heartbreaking moment was, she told me that he had asthma, and then she said, don't write it, because when he reads it, it's going to be so what do you say to a mother like that? One woman was the mother of Ziva Bakman. I don't know how many remember, a few years ago she was in the headlines. The son was captured by Palestinian extremists. And when the Israeli military tried to rescue him, something according to her the Israeli government should not have done, he was then murdered. And there were two other cases of women that were activists and feminists in Israel. There was one woman who lost a brother. There were a few orphans. There were a few women who lost brothers. One woman lost both a brother and a father. One woman lost a brother, and her father subsequently committed suicide on his son's grave, leaving behind 4 bereaved daughters, which submit a message to these girls. On the Palestinian side, that's quite an interesting story. When I went to Israel to do the study, it was 2 years after Oslo. Oslo did not deliver for the Palestinians. Did not deliver for them. Occupation was just as bad, if not worse, than before. So cooperation that did exist between Israeli and Palestinian women almost totally stopped. And when I talked to Israeli women, they told me no Palestinian is going to talk to you. And Oslo also changed conditions on the Israeli side as far as peace groups were concerned. There needed to be a reevaluation of what's next. After all, Oslo is existing, peace is being negotiated. What's our role? How are we going to do what we're doing? Are we still considered as a legitimate group or legitimate groups in Israel, etc., etc.? So on the one hand, there was disagreement among peace groups in Israel regarding strategy and tactics, and on the other hand, any cooperation that exists between Israeli and Palestinian peace activists, female peace activists, stops. So I was told I'm not going to be able to talk to the Palestinians. At the time also, there were a lot of terrorist activities in Israel, and going to the territories to negotiate was unsafe. So, through a colleague from here, I met a Palestinian sociology professor from Birzeit University in Ramallah, who in turn introduced me to a Palestinian woman who he called his assistant. When I met the assistant, and he knew what I'm doing, why I was doing, my background, when I met the assistant, we met in a hotel in Jerusalem on the border dividing east and west. And of course, we both were working on eggs, very tense, very delicate atmosphere. And I asked her in English, do you know who I am? And do you know what you know about me? Yes, I didn't specify. Yes, I do. Do you know what I'm doing? Yes, she did. Do you know what I want you to do? Yes, I do. And then I sat with her and a few hours and I explained to her in details what do I want her to do, how do I want her to interview, etc., etc. Knowing that, and at first I wanted to join her, but I was told don't do that because nobody is going to talk to her in your presence. 5 weeks later, she didn't finish her interviews. So I'm going back home, and I'll tell her I'll be here 6 months later, after the next semester or so. We'll meet. 6 months later, I'm in Israel, bus explosion, territories are closed. Every time there was terrorist activity, the Israelis closed off the territories, of course, preventing Palestinian workers from coming in. So I'm going to meet with her, knowing that she may not be able to cross. That she didn't cross. I am making another appointment with her. Meanwhile, I fall. There's a question whether I'm not going to need knee surgery. I'm leaving Israel. I can't stay. I'm calling. I cannot get her, and I'm calling our contact. I remember something tells me, you know, it's a shame that you're leaving now because she needs the money. She's raising 2 kids by herself. And before I have a chance to say something, he says to me, her husband is in an Israeli jail for the last 2 years, and he's not released by the Israeli authorities. My first reaction was blood on his hands, because that's also Israeli. Do not release, but that's not necessarily true. And then, but that was almost an automatic, which something that I felt guilty about later. And but I was angry. I was angry because I didn't know the information. Should I have known the information before? My second thought: was she an objective interviewer? And then my thought was: so how can any Palestinian be an objective interviewer given the condition under which they live? But I should have known that information. That aside, for a 2 more years, every time I'm in Israel and I call her, she either doesn't show up, calls after she didn't show up. At one point she tells me, I don't remember who you are. Obviously she doesn't want me to have obviously she doesn't want to have any contact with me. The last time I called, she didn't tell me about her husband. Her husband picks up the phone. And now, not only I can get the interviews, but he is eager for me to get the interviews. So, we arranged that he should meet in Jerusalem. And meantime, through him, I get in touch with an organization called Open Doors. And the organization called Open Doors helps administrative, long-term Palestinian administrative prisoners in Israel, help them a little bit financially, help them get legal help. For those of you who don't know what administrative prisoners in the hand of Israelis that haven't been tried, there are no charges against them because there may not be enough evidence to charge them. There are no trials, they just sit and run in jail for years until the Israelis decide to release them, and that's a violation of human rights. So Open Doors tell me you cannot permit him to come to Jerusalem. He's going to be arrested again. So I arranged to go to Ramallah, where they live, with somebody that takes me there. Turned out to be. And then I interviewed her, which was a fascinating interview. He has been in jail for 7 years, on and off. His baby was 4 years old. The baby and the father didn't know themselves. His young wife did struggle and brought up the kids by herself. Now, I met with him on a checkpoint between Israel and the territories, Ramallah. And just giving him his name, being that he was in jail, he is very, very honored, and I'm almost a guest of honor in the Palestinian state. Turned out to be that not only she did, when we sat and talked, that was the first time that she realized that I was Israeli. She thought I was an American. And I asked her, would you have to talk to me? Would you have done that for me if you knew? Even though 30 years, I'm living for 30 years in the States. No, I would never done it for you. Okay, so that's just that part of the story. Who did she interview for me? I asked her to interview at least 10 women. She interviewed 8 women. 4 are widows from the Intifada, and 4 were widows. I asked her to get in touch, if she could get in touch with some victims of 1994, Baruch Goldstein. I don't know how many of you remember. Baruch Goldstein was a Jewish doctor who immigrated from the United States to Israel, and during a Friday prayer in Hebron, in Abraham's tomb, he entered and killed, while praying, 29 people. And he was revered by some extremely extremist Israelis. At any rate, she interviewed 4 of these widows. She didn't interview any orphans. She didn't interview any. I wanted her to talk to female prisoners, former prisoners, for example. The interviews happened to be very poor for 2 reasons. One, the very little details that the women revealed about themselves. Second, she probably was not the greatest interview. Turned out also to be that the assistant is really a husband and not her. So when he told me that this was his assistant, it was not. But that's beside the story. Now, what about, is peace a human right? that peace is a human right was established in Resolution 3911 of November 12, 1984, that stating that the General Assembly resolved solemnly, the General Assembly solemnly proclaims that the people of our planet have a sacred right to peace. Paragraph 2 solemnly declares that the preservation of the right of peoples to peace and the promotion of its implementation constitutes a fundamental obligation of each state, etc., etc. So it's been established internationally that peace is a right. Do women, I'm going to conclude and then ask questions. Do Israeli and Palestinian women hold their leaders accountable for the absence of peace? The answer is contextual and situational. Within the Israeli historical context, Israel being a society that has been preoccupied with the issue of security, Israeli women and other issues, economic issues, population absorption, immigration absorption, etc., etc., Israeli women in general view themselves as citizens first and women second. I'll tell you that in my experience in 1968, I was fighting the government against its discriminatory decision to stop compensation to childless, only childless war widows. The atmosphere in Israel after the stunning victory in 1967, no woman agreed to collaborate with me on my efforts. Nobody. When I went to the government, when I was talking to the appropriate persons, I was offered psychological help. Do you need to talk to a psychologist? You know we'll do it for you. In other words, I was crazy for complaining that my rights were violated, that this was a discriminatory government decision. Within the concept of just war, and here I'm just going to limit myself to viewing war as a war of survival, Israeli women did not view themselves at all as victims, and I'll go through each war in a minute. And within the context of military-civilian relationships, you see that when the military enjoys a high degree of prestige, women do not view themselves as victims, but when the prestige of the military, for whatever reason, erodes, women start to demonstrate and start to mobilize themselves against war. How do I know that? What did women think about particular wars? 1948 in Israel, War of Independence, was considered by everybody a just war, considered a war of no choice, and also the myth of David versus Goliath, with the feud against the many, the disorganized army against the organized army. Now we know that it's a myth for the most part, but women did not at all view themselves as the victims. It was a war of no choice, women would say. 1967. Once again, the war was perceived as a just war, having no choice. As a matter of fact, if you read literature about Israel at the time, many in Israel felt that or believed that Egypt, Syria, with the help of the Soviet Union, was preparing another Holocaust for the Israelis. And when the UN was unable to convince President Nasser at the time that he should not withdraw UN peacekeeping forces from the Sinai Desert, Israelis felt that they were completely isolated in the world, and of course in the region, and that they had no choice but to preempt. So the war was a just war, and the jubilation of a victory was so widespread that, as I said, I'm the only one that I know that was talking about violation, and I was viewed as crazy. 1973, Israeli intelligence scoops does not read all the signs that are there that the war is going to break up. The army is completely unprepared. The first few days of the war, soldiers are being slaughtered by the hundreds with the underwear on. First time in Israel history, The conduct of the army is being investigated by a state commission. Until then, the army was a sacred cow, nobody touches the army. The prestige of the army is being eroded, and women widows and orphans start to view themselves as victims, not because the war is unjust, Israel was attacked, but because the army and the government were not prepared. But they're not yet organized. They're not yet organizing themselves as female peace movements. 1982, the war in Lebanon is for the first time considered in Israel as an unjust war, and then you see women, not necessarily bereaved, but women organizing, demanding a lot of protest movements, demanding the withdrawal, the end of the war, and then the withdrawal. From Lebanon. 1987, the Intifada. The Israeli army is viewed, instead of a defense army, as an army that, and I don't know how many of you remember the pictures on television, as an army that is fighting children who fight the Israeli occupation with stones. The image of the army erodes even further, the prestige of the army erodes even further, and you have groups that really that are demanding a dialogue with the PLO, the end of occupation, and so forth. Still, only 2 of the 30 women that I talked to were peace activists. Both started the peace activism before their sons died. One of them wanted the son to go, both of them wanted the son not to go back to Lebanon and go to jail. There were officers that wouldn't do that, but both of them asked their mothers to go to the streets and demonstrate. And you also have, in 1973, you already have one of the questions that I asked. I had a questionnaire of 20 questions. One was the personal story, and the others moved from the personal experience to the political experience. I wanted to know whether they had a connection between the personal experience and political activism. And there was, one of the questions was the sacrifice justified? And as the army's image deteriorates, you see that the sacrifice was not, that women feel that the sacrifice of the son, husbands, brothers was not justified at all. You have many women on the left saying that no sacrifice of life is worth anything, including statehood. And other women, some women on the right say that martyrdom, that the sacrifice is martyrdom, and that's very similar. Almost all Palestinian, the 8 Palestinian women spoke about, described their husbands as martyrs. What about Palestinian women? Well, of course, their situation was entirely different than the Israelis. They lived under occupation. Of course, they blame the Israelis. They don't blame their leadership. Only after Oslo, even after Oslo, only when, with the creation of the Palestinian Authority, do groups, not just women, but men, start to talk about the violation of human rights in the territories. And Hanan Ashrawi, who was a female who was part of the delegation in Madrid and then in a Palestinian elected parliament, forms a group, resigns a position as education minister, I think, and forms a group that is going to monitor human rights violations by the leadership. Of course, all Palestinian women approve the war situation or the liberation struggle against the Israelis. So they support the war efforts rather than looking at it as a violation of their right to peace. As I mentioned already, they are much more cautious with information that they reveal. They would not be taped. Salwa, the woman that helped me, would not be taped, refused to be taped. And that's about it. Only one woman was talking about, an Israeli woman, was talking about a specific specific violation of the right to have a family. Violation and the government, Israeli government decision, it was to go to fight Lebanon and then to remain there. It was a violation of her human rights to a family. Others did not use that language. I'll end here, and I'm sure, I mean, if you do have questions, I'll answer that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What made the Free husband want to give you the interview?
Good question. First of all, since he was home, she was allowed to do that. She was no longer betraying her. If she thought that she was betraying her people, or that she was collaborating, there was a question of collaborators. She was no longer collaborating. He must, he was, his human rights were violated. He was 7 years in jail without a conviction, without a trial. So that's a violation of human rights. And he wanted her story heard. How did she raise 2 children on her own? The relationship between what's happening at home now, that his eldest son that was about 7 hardly knew him, and the youngest son didn't know him at all. Her hardship as a woman. I asked him, he was accused by the Israelis of being a terrorist. I asked him, were you engaged in terrorist activities? So first he smiled and he said, no, I was involved with a more radical group, but I was never engaged in terrorist activities.
There's just one other question I want to ask you. Is Rabin's widow, I mean, especially in light of the fact that her husband was killed by people who oppose his
definitely a victim of
the peace process.
Right.
Has she embraced the idea that you're saying that peace is a fundamental right?
I approached her, and she was too busy for me, and she was nasty. I mean, she was really nasty. She answered me. She could say the same thing in a much nicer way. So she runs around the country, and she collects about $20,000 per lecture here. No success. So I don't know what she felt. Yes.
I was wondering whether you would find any differences, either on the sense of victimization or who to blame or whatever, if, and I don't know if this is true of any of the women you've interviewed, if you broke them down in terms of the Jewish women, for example, were they Ashkenazi, were they Latinos, were they born there, were they Russians, were they, because it seems to me that that would be a very fascinating breakdown.
It is, thank you. I mean, thank you. I'm going to look at the interviews now and look at them that way. I interviewed one Russian woman who, interestingly enough, until she went to college, she knew she was Jewish only because of her last name and only because other kids in school made fun of her name. There was no practicing of Judaism at all. She then moved to Moscow to the university to study in a university where the Jewish population is much larger, where she met her husband to be that was Jewish. They migrated to Israel. He was religious. She became religious. They became settlers. And her husband was killed in Intifada. And to her, he is a martyr. And the sacrifice was, of course, worthy. Not only given the fact that he protected the land of Israel more than the state of Israel, but he fulfilled the settlement. And he was a Jewish settler in the biblical land of Israel. So I don't know if her Russian background or her religious background, certainly a religious background, tells me, influences ideology. Whether her Russian background does, I didn't even ask her. That would be an interesting question. Other than that, I must say that women on the right wouldn't talk to me. Because when I revealed, and I did, that I have the intention to talk to Palestinian women, they wouldn't collaborate with me. One group, Women in Green, sent me to, or some of them belong to a group called Victims of Terror, sent me to the spokesman who would be the only one to authorize anybody speaking with me. His question was immediately, are you going to talk to Palestinians? And I said, yes. He said, I'm not going to help you in writing such a book. Then I was talking to a Palestinian, a Jewish, by then she was a Knesset member, very far right, talks in a very sweet, peaceful voice, saying the most awful things about another group. She gave me a speech, an hour on the phone, long distance. I talked to her. An hour she kept me on the phone, telling me why she wouldn't talk to me. And I wrote down every word, I mean, as much as I could. Now, I don't know if I can use it legally, that's because I didn't interview. But it's fascinating, her explanation for an hour why she wouldn't talk to me. And she called me sick. I was sick by daring to compare the Palestinian experience with the Israeli experience. One, the Israelis are people who want to build a state, they have the right to build a state. The others are murderers and killers. The others are bringing their misery to themselves. They are to blame for their own situation. And now, so I don't have one more religious woman that was on the right, the mother of Nachshon Waxman, who initially would not talk to me. Then when I approached her on the phone once again, she said, you know what, I want the interview, but after you finish all the interviews, I'll talk to you on the phone. After I finished all the interviews, she was religious, and it was Friday 3 o'clock, and Friday 3 o'clock, it was just before the Sabbath. And I call her, and she starts talking. And what am I doing? So I said, you know what, just what are you telling, do me a favor, what you're telling me right now, tell it to me in person. And I was on Pasha, that was just before I left Israel. She said, okay, come Sunday morning. 8 o'clock in the morning, Sunday, with a cab from Tel Aviv on Pasha, I was in the house, and she talked to me. And it was a fascinating interview. Yes. Sorry, yeah. Wait.
Go ahead.
Okay.
This is a good point.
What were some of the reasons or excuses that the Palestinian women gave you for not being interviewed? I would imagine...
I didn't talk to them. Some was
No one else, yes, but I would imagine they would be afraid to participate in things like this because it's a political nature and you could get killed for taking sides.
That's what I thought, that it was a period in the West Bank, there were a lot of murders of the so-called collaborators.
And it was very dangerous to go to Ramallah.
So, I didn't go, that's why I
Because
didn't
I
go.
was in Ramallah.
I went later. Last year it wasn't dangerous, especially since I was the guest of...
Well, in the 60s it wasn't so bad, but it became more dangerous to go anywhere.
Well, 95, 96 was very
To go
dangerous.
to any of these
So that's
places,
part
but
of the reason I didn't
having
go.
been in Israel that 6 times, starting in 58, the problems have not changed yet. The country is growing and it's highly developed, but their safety and security is still always online. Because there are so many groups that have formed to give up their lives for Allah, etc. So you have school children, buses, etc., where you never know what's going to happen.
I think that the security dilemma...
And then you have retaliation. So there's always blood and there's constant death in all of these years.
Well, I think that...
The only difference I find is that Israel has progressed and the Arabs have not.
I wouldn't say that the Arabs have not progressed, the Arabs have progressed.
But not at the same rate.
Well, they would say that they haven't progressed at the same rate because of conditions that were imposed on them by Arabs. But let me just stick for a minute to the security dilemma. I think that it's highly exaggerated. I think that, as a victim of that whole thing, I think that the security issue is being used and abused. And I think many Israelis are now recognizing that the security dilemma is not as severe as it once was. There is no question that it once was. But since 1967, Arab states have eliminated, or I think viewed the military option as no option. And if you look at the history of the PLO, you see that since 1973, since the Yom Kippur War, you see that our speeches by Arafat and others, you see that the policy, the strategy and tactics of the PLO also is changing.
But
So there'll always be security
right.
consideration
But
on both sides.
There's
But
almost
what
a
struck
war.
me this week, what struck
Absolutely.
me last week or 2 weeks ago, is that in one of the agreements, 122 PLO members were freed from the jail. They were immediately made policemen on Arafat's police force for security. Now you know that.
Where did you read that?
It was in the New York Times.
Not 120 of them, not the 120 of them were immediately made policemen. Some were made and some were not.
Well, they had 122.
Many of the policemen are former prisoners. Look, Arafat himself has probably more blood on his hands than many of his policemen. So how long do you carry that? What do? You don't negotiate, you continue this vicious cycle where it claims more and more victims? Women as well as men?
John, I have two questions. When you said in '68 you couldn't find anyone, did you try Leah Zimmel, or you didn't want to try her?
Leah Zimmel. Who was Leah Zimmel? I'm sorry that I am ignorant about it.
She does human rights in Jerusalem, but the problem is she may have been an affiliation with the Communist Party, so I'm not...
No, I was looking
Right.
for women in my own condition because others did not have
Abuse, right.
and did not have a reason to demonstrate.
No, because she was a lawyer, that's why I asked.
Oh, Leah Zimmel. No, but I went to the Knesset and I went to,
Right. Yeah.
I did other things. The law was changed subsequently.
Ah,
Not because, well,
that makes sense.
no. I left Israel 2 years later because, for a variety of reasons, including that I was offered, 2 years later, I was offered a job by the Israeli government in New York. And I didn't want to take it for moral consideration. Oh, I'm in the middle of the fight, I'm not going to do that. But then I was so much involved in that, and so much involved with bereavement and aggrievement, and then I gave an interview to a paper, and my picture was in a paper, and a stalker made my life miserable, and I didn't involve the police right, and then when I involved the police, told me that my life was in danger, and they wanted surveillance, and I said, let me get out of, I just couldn't take it anymore on a personal level, and I left. But the law, when I was involved with that, in the media, a public debate started, whether it was a right or wrong policy. So the government extended the compensation for 1 more year, at which time Shulamit Aloni, who then headed, a member of the Knesset she was, and then she headed the civil rights movement, and she introduced the bill, and the law was changed.
There was one other thing. I don't know if you know, because you knew that Yael Dayan was here a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
Did you see her? Because she's
I was teaching, I couldn't go.
You couldn't because she was in Columbia. It was
Right.
interesting. It would have been interesting if you'd been there.
I approached her too.
To hear what she had. Because this time she was very optimistic. She said, you know, this
About the
is
peace program, I'm optimistic too.
And she,
As one can be, you know.
No, but also about women's things. She said, you know, because of the Netanyahu government, a lot of things have been on hold. And she's also confident that, you know, any dialogue that they've been having, like Naomi Kazan and so on, with Ashrawi and so on, that they've been having with the Palestinian community, and also grassroots level, can continue. And I'm just wondering if I assume that...
For cooperation and a
Yes.
dialogue between women's peace group to continue, the Palestinian women have to feel that conditions on the ground are changing somewhat. And I think they feel now. Barak may be as hard negotiator as Netanyahu was. I don't think Netanyahu was any negotiator at all. I think he went through emotions in time without any intention to honor any agreement or implement it. But any criticism that you hear on Barack, his style of government is dictatorial, etc. But everybody says one thing about him, he's honest.
But what about the Lebanon issue? You said you remove people from Lebanon.
We
but
didn't even
failed
want
to
to-
draw, and I read in the New York Times that the practices are for escalation, not for withdrawal.
The different military tactics, escalation in terms of air warfare,
Right.
but moving right.
But I mean, come on.
There is not going to be peace in Lebanon. I mean, there is not going to be any solution in Lebanon until and unless there is a resolution of the Syrians. Syrians control Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the Syrians are using it very smartly for the Syrians as a tactic against Israel. So, to solve the Lebanon issue, unless Israel does it unilaterally, which I don't think even Barack would, unless it withdraws unilaterally, the situation with Lebanon is going to be solved or concluded vis-a-vis the Syrians. Because the Syrian government, there is no, for all practical purposes, there is no government to negotiate within Lebanon. The Syrians control the situation. No Lebanese government is going to make any agreement with Israel without the consent of the Syrians.
But then, I guess my whole thing is, I have a problem with then what you're saying. You talk about the fact that if I understood you correctly, that Lebanon was not a just war.
Right. Many Israelis
So,
think
right. So the fact is they do not have any moral right to be there anyway. So the idea
That's not the
that
same thing.
I understand what you're saying,
Mhm.
but I am trying to tie this in with your promotion of a peace movement and why it is not right that if it was not a just war in the first place, unilateral withdrawal is the just solution.
I think Israel is caught in Lebanon in almost the same situation that Americans were caught in Vietnam. And to maintain the prestige of the military, the Israeli government will not withdraw unilaterally, admitting that Hezbollah won the Lebanon situation. So I think it's a matter of prestige, and it's a matter of...
But America withdrew in the long run, and they suffered.
And I think that the Israelis will go in the long run too. In a year from
The
now.
long run, Israel will go too.
But you see, my problem, and I'll be very honest with you, is you look at what happened to Jews and the whole idea right now of compensation, demanding compensation left, right, and center for the moral wrongs that were done to
And the physical wrongs, and
right.
the property wrongs.
Right, exactly. But it all started from an unjust assumption and from things like what you're saying, a degradation of a person's human rights.
I have a problem with you comparing the situation in the Holocaust with the situation in the Middle East.
Let me put it this way. The Holocaust involved a lot of people physically dying in a war.
Not in a war.
No.
Not in a war.
In a war.
Not in a
That
war.
was not
It was not a war. They were captured prisoners.
That was the
Right.
final solution.
Not in a war.
And slave
Create
labor.
an ethnically pure German
Right.
race.
They were citizens of Germany.
Right.
They were citizens of Germany.
Right.
They were singled out as an ethnic group that was stripped of their
Absolutely.
right to live. And
Absolutely.
there were no byproduct. There is no war situation where two armies fight over territory,
Right.
or whatever it is the groups fight of.
I
And then they did it in every
agree.
other country.
Precisely. It was a war situation which was taken advantage of. In the sense that yes, they were taken prisoners and in terms
You're
of
wrong. They were
No.
not a war situation.
It
They
was
were
not.
not prisoners.
The
They
final
went to
solution-
every country, Czechoslovakia, Austria, France.
But did they
Poland,
capture them?
And they took them. They were not fighting people. These were people who were living in designated areas, in ghettos. They then took them and put them on transport.
They
and
were
put them
citizens.
into
There were no,
camps.
the Jews that
There
were
was no
executed
war.
were
There
no
was no
soldiers
war.
fighting the Germans. They were citizens who were targeted because of their ethnicity.
Right.
And any
but it
situation-
was a war situation.
No.
Wherever Germany
The war
went.
situation was divorced from the story of the Holocaust. Did the war allow for that to happen? Did the war was a situation that permitted the Germans to do what, to exercise
Who
the
had
kind of
sovereign
solution?
right over the areas that they ethnically cleansed?
All the other governments but then you're saying to me that because the Nazis were fighting sovereign states and the Jews were citizens of those foreign states, I don't understand what you're saying.
I am merely saying that in a war situation, Hitler took advantage of a war situation and created a disaster.
Let me ask you a question. If there was no war situation, would he not have done the same thing to the Jews, you think?
In Germany,
In Germany? If you read my account, years written in 1938, it's all written there.
I was just going to say, if you read Hitler's writings,
Right.
he had planned this
Right, it's
war
all there.
or no war.
It's all in my
He was
hand.
going to exterminate the Jews from Germany
Absolutely.
because he
All
wanted
right.
to create a racially pure state.
okay, and can I then say to you that when you look at the situation with the settlers and driving Palestinians out of certain areas, is that analogous to creating pure geographical areas?
No.
No.
And it is not because as to build settlements, Jewish settlements in the West Bank and Gaza are illegal by the standards of international law. But to build the settlement is entirely, there is no comparison at all, no analogy at all between that and exterminating people for the ethnic background. Now the difference between the situation, the German and even other groups that they killed, such as the Gypsies, for example. The Norman Gypsies were given the status of the Jews, by the way. The Gypsies who settled were not touched. Now, other genocides occurred as a result of groups of fighting nationalistic wars. They were fighting over territories, their historical claims. As unjust as genocide is, but there were always some other claims involved. There were no claims against the Jews of Eastern Europe and Western and Germany. No claims. They were targeted as an ethnic group to be exterminated and to purify Germany and Europe.
You know, I understand that the emotionalism that comes with discussion of the Holocaust. It's the emotionalism that I feel when you have discussion of slavery.
Slavery, right.
Okay? But I also look at things in a more expansive fashion, I would call it. And I'm saying that when in today's political atmosphere and in today's world, we have a policy which drives people out of a particular area
Ethnic cleansing.
so that you can capture that area. It may not have taken the final step, but you are still guilty of the problem of ethnic cleansing. That's what I
You may be guilty of ethnic cleansing, you may be even guilty of violation of international law. But you're not guilty of genocide.
I didn't say that. Never said
I'm
that.
saying that.
Okay?
Oh, that's wonderful.
That's a wonderful conclusion, right?
Well, no, it's not a conclusion yet because Harry Potter has something to say.
No, I
Maria has
was
something
going
to say.
to totally change.
Please.
All I was going to say is at the beginning, it's not even a question, it's more of a comment, but at the beginning, when you were talking about women involved in peace movements, you know, whether Israeli or Palestinian, and you sort of commented on this presumption of women being nurturing, whatever. And what went through my mind is that's not the reason women are.
No, it's not.
But what may be the reason is that all the levers of power are held by men.
Right.
So men make all the critical decisions. They're not accountable. Their, quote, malehood prevents them from being accountable or admitting anything. So a peace movement is, I'm exaggerating obviously, is left to women who have nothing to lose in a sense.
And I think they demand accountability. That's what we want, accountability on the decisions that men, mostly men, make.
No, I agree. It's just that.
How can you possibly agree? How can you possibly agree to something like that?
Wait. Let me finish. Because,
I must tell you a story, another story.
No, there is one little exception in Israeli political history. You remember a former prime minister.
Golda Meir. And you know what women say about Golda Meir when I ask them? She's not a woman. She was not a woman.
I do gender and public policy. You see that happening over and over again, where women, Margaret Thatcher, a woman. All I'm saying, and what I liked about what you said, was that women are the conscience of the world, so to speak.
Oh, I don't know.
I
like to think that, but okay.
It is quite true. But all I like the idea that it is. Frankly, I was not expecting what you talked about. Absolutely not, especially coming from an Israeli side point of view, and especially in light of what you read, that
pretty much like the Palestinian women who were surprised at what I told them.
It's very true, and that's why it's interesting to see that you are looking at human rights and the way in which to end the problem in the Middle East, which for me is a rather fascinating.
Okay, yes.
I find the idea that women are the conscience of the world
That is exaggerated.
extraordinary. I mean,
Exaggerated.
furthermore, it's my experience that there are a lot of men who are involved in peace movements. And there are a lot of women
Not so many in Israel.
Well, maybe not in Israel.
Or in the Palestinian territory.
Yeah.
Because men are busy fighting.
True. But there are also some of the most rabid ethnic cleansers are women. I'm thinking specifically about, I have an Indian woman in my class. The class is on African foreign policy. And I don't know how she started to get off of Pakistanis. In ways which I thought were kind of convoluted and totally unrelated to the class, but by the time she's finished talking, all Pakistanis should be killed. Now, you see, I'm just giving this as an example of my own class, but I'm sure you know as well as I do that the divide is not really, because this, we used to joke around with that. I mean, I used to say that if Africa was run by women, it would be much better for it, but I'm not sure.
Some of the women agree with you. They didn't. Many women agree. One of the questions that I had was, I read to them a UNESCO report in 1995, where women giving the opportunity to participate in the political process, decision making. And where they collaborated and formed majorities, they were able to change national priorities. And I asked them, do you think that that's applicable to your society? Many women say no, it's not. Many women do not. Why do the bereaved are missing from the peace protest movements? After talking to them, the only reason is they're emotionally exhausted. They can't. They barely make it to the next day. I don't know why. I thought that was an answer. Sure.
No, but again, you know that even in Israel, and there are a lot of people in the peace movement, there's a movement of Israeli intellectuals that has always been in the vanguard of the Israeli peace movement for a long time. Even though...
Peace Now.
What?
Peace Now.
Peace Now. There's a couple of others too. There was that collaboration between Israeli and Palestinian academics that were meeting secretly, you know.
Well, in Copenhagen, last 2 years ago, they really started a dialogue in a conference in Copenhagen. Interesting story. I have a sister who last year met, she's a widow, she met a man. And the man is a bereaved father. And last year when I came to Israel, before that she told him what I was doing. So the first time we met, he was very angry. Why am I interviewing only women? Why was I interviewing women only? Was he not in pain? Was his pain lesser than that of a mother? That's true, he wasn't. But then he was the one who drove me to Ramallah, to South Wazenari's house. And he was sitting through the interview. And at the end of the interview, he told me, I'm bowing to you and I apologize for my criticism of you, because I only now start to realize how important it is that women's voices
Be heard.
should be heard. And that to me was the best compliment, coming from a bereaved father, than anything else. Yeah.
You know, this reminds me of women's suffering. When we think of Russia and the Chechen War, or any war, how even during World War II, how many men were lost in Russia in the army. Millions, 20 million were lost. All right? And these women were left without sons and without husbands. They have the same thing going on constantly. Now, the war in Afghanistan, they lost. They had the war in Chechnya, they lost. They have a war now in Pakistan. It is unbelievable as to the death of male figures.
Well, no question that male are the ultimate, men who die are the ultimate sacrifice.
They can't settle what they want. One wants independence, and the other one wants...
Men cannot settle what they
I'm
want?
talking about like in Pakistan or Chechnya. They want to be independent of Russia. They need the oil. Russia wants to control it. Innocent soldiers are sent without the proper guns and whatever. You know, they're just sending them out. And that reminds me of Vietnam. We also sent boys in Vietnam to a war that they could never win. You know, there were no mountains, there was no this, there were no guns. It was just unbelievable.
But women do, Golda Meir and Margaret Thatcher and the Gandhis and others from time immemorial, other women did that too. So this is not an exclusively male.
No, it's not. It's the same thing. And, you know,
Whatever word you want.
there are parts where you want to help the women who have been ravaged or raped. Their own towns won't take them back. If you try to go and help them through UN or NGO organizations, the women are afraid to talk to you because there are people with guns around who can just blow you apart. Look what happened in Nigeria, cutting off hands, feet, whatever.
That's why.
I mean, it's just unbelievable and inhumane. It's just.
That's why I thought one of my primary questions was to you. You used to, as a group that is a target, that is victimized by war, and depends on a war again. Some say yes.
I mean, 2 wars. You know, there's about 40 wars going on right now.
How many more?
I mean, maybe more. Right?
Rape in Africa? What are you talking?
You know, but it was not until the 1990s when in Bosnia and Rwanda, when it was made public that rape became a war fighting tool.
Strategy, yeah.
Strategy. That the issue really got the attention that it deserved. Not before that, there was no mentioning of that. Yes.
I just want to make an anecdotal comment. Letty Pogrebin, who I don't really like, had a suggestion in the September-October issue of CUNY that Barack consider Colette Abitaille to be foreign minister. Or to be represented.
She would not be a bad foreign minister.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
But his political constraints made him choose Levy.
Right.
But may I ask you, in Israel right now, you talk about the two groups of women. You have a very, which one do you think would win out in a political
What do you mean,
battle?
two groups?
You have the party of the Green and the woman who
The
had
green-
won the
Green,
vote for our
women in green?
right, who are for the war, who believe that
They're not for war, they're against,
they are for, they want land, so
right,
they want,
they're
they want,
against the peace. Everybody's for peace. We talk to everybody, oh, we're for peace, of course.
but in
What kind of peace do you want? And they're against territorial concession.
Right.
They're not taken seriously in Israel. What they view as a conspiracy against them, because the press does not cover the demonstration, it's not a conspiracy, it's that they're not taken seriously.
But don't you tell me about of a Knesset member who had you on the phone for an hour?
She's no longer a Knesset member. That's not bad.
She's no longer an influential person in Israel.
She lost her husband and a son in a terrorist attack. And she said that her view did not change. I mean, it couldn't change very much. I mean, she was so extremist.
But isn't that indicative of a significant percentage of women and how they feel about the process?
I don't know the percentage, but I don't think it's significant. Close to 80% of the Israelis support Oslo and support territorial concession and support Palestinian statehood.
Right.
And that should tell us something. Okay, thank you.
Well, wait a minute. I have to give my speech.
You did? You gave it before?
No, it's another one. My second speech, and my most important speech for the day, is that I sincerely want to thank Ziva, not only for what I've learned today, and I suspect that some of you have also learned a few things. Some of you. But I think I ought to let you know this. You know that Ziva is here as a volunteer. She doesn't get paid for this. She.
Can you?
Well, no. Yeah, don't talk. She volunteered to do this, and I told her, look, we don't have any money. We're just a small group that's just beginning. We just want you to. And she says, yeah, of course I'll do it. And I also want you to thank you for a very important subject, which a lot of people don't want to talk about, obviously. A lot of people don't talk about this, obviously.
I cannot get a publisher, by the way.
Good. Oh, great.
Cannot.
You can't. Well, we'll find you a publisher. Don't worry about it. Talk to Adi.
Because it's too
Incendiary.
It's too late.
too specialized.
No, well, we can spread it out. If you do it on only the interviews, it probably wouldn't sell. But if you broaden it into a general discussion about women and peace, and the whole right to peace thing is very interesting.
Right. I think you're
as an example of progress from Beijing in the Middle East.
Progress
Progress
from Beijing.
One example of progress from Beijing.
That's a bit of a stretch, but we'll take it.
That's a stretch.
and your whole thing was misnamed. I mean, what they said, Israeli and Palestinian, it didn't tell you. It probably should have been more woman for peace as a human rights issue.
What I would like to do
Right.
is
Okay.
I'd like to go to Ireland and I'd like to go to Kosovo and I'd like to go to other places. But
That's what it would have attracted. I was just coming from a general public policy class. It could have attracted those people because it never came across as a feminine issue. If you and that's what it should have come across as.
Feminine or feminist or both?
Both.
If you listen to Gab, it's feminist, yeah? So.
Yeah, I guess if you had said something, if I had said women and the right to peace and made like this a case study, colon, maybe it would have attracted more.
Yeah, it was a total mistake.
Well, I call it iron breaks too. Colon. Israeli and Palestinian women talk on war, breathing and peace. And iron breaks too is a quote from one of the women.
So anyway, Ziva, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
Have a very